Good morning, people. How's it going? Let me hide this. Today, we're going to continue on in Chapter 11, Preparing a Budget. And we're going to talk about Section 11.2, which is electronic utilities. This is a pretty big one as far as expenses go that can really be something that adds up very quickly. And we tend to think about, but it's something we use the most often. So learning objectives will be able to compute the cost of cell phone if you calls, texts, internet service, Wi-Fi, cable, how much that costs. We're going to be able to compare different plans for these services and then set up, graph, and interpret average cost function to kind of determine which one is the best, why or why not, those different types of things. So let's hop right on in. Could you imagine a life without electronic utilities? Could you imagine your life without Wi-Fi? Right now? No. Could you imagine your life without internet access, a computer, a cell phone? I personally could not imagine life right now without a cell phone. A life without cable, satellite, or fiber TV. Depending on who you are, when we lump all of those together, like Wi-Fi, computers, cell phones, and TV services, could you imagine your life without those four things? I think not. It would be a very, very, very different world than what we're living in. And actually, these are super new. They weren't even developed in 1969, which is when like my dad was born. My dad was born in the summer of 1969. That's also when we first landed on the moon. But like that was something that wasn't even thought of. That's something that you would think that they would see in sci-fi movies. So really, when I'm sure you guys hear this all the time being Gen Z, but we hear all the time like, oh, back in my day, we didn't have that. No, like I'm older than the internet. And I'm not even that old, right? But all of these things are so new and they came about so recently, but they're a huge part um, of our lives. It's changed the world as we know it right now so differently. Like, could you guys imagine right now going through what we're going through in the world without the internet? Could you imagine going through this quarantine time with, maybe color TV? It's so different. So, I mean, I'm not mad at it. I love technology. I love the way it's changed things. It's made this learning opportunity available. But it's affected our monthly budget. And since we're talking about budgets, we have to consider the cost of these electronic utilities. So, oh, look, yeah, there's a moon landing. Don't at me. It happened. It's not a conspiracy. That's my own personal belief. So, these, you're about to feel attacked, okay? Um, if we were to ask each other, ourselves, thinking about this in terms of a monthly budget, how much time do you spend on the internet? Yeah, I plead the fifth for this one right now. How many texts do you send or receive a month? Do you know the terms of your cell phone contract? What type of TV subscription do you have? In terms of like cable, satellite, fiber optics, not other streaming services. Do you know what do you know about different plans offered for each different type of electronic utility? Are you sure that the plan that you have right now is the most optimal for how much you use that item? Um, are you checking your bills each month to verify that they're correct? I should, but I don't always. But I do look at them periodically. And lastly, could you change or adjust your usage to lower the costs, or vice versa? Could you find a different plan that's more optimal and lowers your costs? So, oops, wrong one. I personally feel attacked with all of these questions because right now, all I'm doing is spending time on the internet, and all I'm doing is calling and texting people and using my phone for entirely far too long. Um, and I do know the vague terms of my contract, but no, I don't check my bill every month to make sure it's right. And now I'm not sure if this is the most optimal one, but it's the one I went with. So this one, I feel I'm feeling a little sweaty here. um, but these are some real things. Like if you're really working with a true budget, these are some things that you should be able to, at the very least, have an idea of or answer. So that's what we're going to do. Ooh, excuse me, today. So there's a handful of examples. Example one, there's our girl, Janice. Janice's cell phone plan includes 3 gigabytes of data and unlimited talk and text. This costs her $90 per billing period, $90 a month generally. For the past year, every other month she uses 3.2. So every other month she goes over her data allowance, and each extra gigabyte costs her $15. So she goes over every other month. It's gonna cost her $15 every time she does go over. If the extra fees and taxes are approximately $29 per billing cycle, what's her average monthly fees for the cell phone use? So we know that she pays $90 per billing period plus any taxes and fees, right? So, but she continues to go over. So how much on average is she spending for her cell phone bill a month? And this is something that you might want to consider, especially if you're on like a plan with either like for example, in Janice's experience, she might just want to purchase more gigabytes, right? To avoid that additional $15 every other month. Is it worth it to buy that extra gigabyte, or is it worth it to just, spend the $15 every other month? That's something that a cost analysis that you might want to check out. I know for a while when I was on my parents' cell phone plan, it was my mom, my dad, my sister, and myself on this plan, and we never got close to using all the minutes. However, when we were all working in different areas and we didn't all have access to Wi-Fi all of the time, we went over our data very frequently, and the bills that month were extremely high, to the point where we had to purchase more data. And then some months we had to cut back, and it was just we were always changing our monthly plan. Or whoever went over the most, we were starting to compare people's data because we were like, how are we always going over this data all of the time? And then started charging those people the extra costs and fees. So it's something you might want to consider. All right, my story aside, let's figure it out. So on the months where she goes over her gigabytes, she has to pay for 4 gigs. You can't pay for a partial gig, you have to pay for the whole thing. So to find the average monthly fees, we have to find out how much she spends throughout the whole year and then just divide it by 12. That's going to give me the average because there's 12 months in a year, right? So the very first one we have is if she's under, it's $90 a month, exactly her bill, plus $29 for her monthly fees, which is leaving us $119. So she does that every other month. She doesn't go over her gigabytes. So that's if she's under those 3Gs. If she's over, though, it's $90 plus my $15 fee plus $29 for taxes and fees as well. Now I have 119 and 134. Remember, every other month she's under and every other month she's over. So if we're saying, quote unquote, every other month, if I talk about that numerically, that would be 6 times a year she's under and 6 times a year she's over, right? So if I multiply each amount by 6, whoa. If I multiply each amount by 6, 119 times 6 and 134 times 6, I get $1,518. That's how much she pays a year for a cell phone. And if we divide that by 12, we get $126.50. So on average, Janice pays $126.50. Some months it's higher, like 119, or higher, like 134, and some months it's lower. But on average, she can expect this cost of at least $126.50, which is very important when we're starting to build a budget. But those are some very real things that you guys are probably going to be comparing at some point in your life when you have your own cell phone plan. Which plan's the most efficient? Which plan meets my needs? Which one's the most cost effective? What about between different carriers? Things like that. If you go over, how much is that going to cost you? Does it add up quickly? Okay. Example 2. Jake's cell phone plan includes 4 gigabytes of data, so he's already above Janice. He's like, nah, girl, I know I'm going to go over. Let me just buy the 4 gigs. On the 19th day of the billing period, he got a message. Oof. That said he's used 75% of his data for the billing period. At this rate, will Jake use more than 4 gigabytes of data? I'll tell you, I used to get this message all the time. This is very real, people. Okay, remember when I was telling you that I was on my parents' cell phone plan? Me, my mom, my dad, my sister. Because there were some inconsistencies and when we didn't always have access to Wi-Fi, we went over our gigabytes frequently, and we always got this text message that said we've used 75% of our data for the billing period and how many days we had remaining. And it was always either really, really close to the end, so we would be really, really self-conscious of how much we would be using our phone so that we wouldn't go over, or it was way too early on. Like, it was kind of like this, where we're 19 days in, and they're like, hey, you still have 11 days left. And we're like, shoot, we've already used all of this. So at this rate, will Jake use more than 4 gigabytes of data? Yeah, it appears so. If he's 19 days in and he's 75% of the way through, he probably is going to go over it. But how can we be sure? How can we mathematically, remember this math class, mathematically show that? So we need to compare percentages and then see how much to make sense of it, to quantify it. We need a percentage, makes the most sense. Um, and see how much 19 days is out of the entire billing period, and then say, based on this percentage, yep, for sure, or no, maybe not. So we're just going to say 19 out of 30 days. Let's just assume that this is a 30-day billing period. Most are 30-day billing periods. So we need to figure out this is a decimal. So 19 over 30, round to 3 decimal places, gives us 0.633. And then I don't want a decimal though. I need it in a percentage. So we're going to do the old conversion switcheroo ski. Multiply that by 100 and we get 63.3%. So the 19th day represents 63% of the billing period. 63% of the billing period. Um, he's used up 75% in 63% of the month. Yeah, he's definitely going to go over and have to pay for extra data and fees and things like that. So this is just a really quick way to evaluate for sure that he will. I mean, it was pretty intuitive, right? That he was going to go over if he's only 19 days in. But what's nice about this tells us like it's over half, 63.3%. It's over half. He has a little less than 40% left. And if he's continuing to use his phone at this same rate, makes no changes at all, he's definitely going to go over just by his data consumption. Now, I mean, of course, this is always subject to change. People can turn off cellular like data usage on their phones. I know I used to do that a lot to help avoid going over data, find places with Wi-Fi, things like that. But if he were to continue at this rate, yeah, they're likely going to go over. Okay. Example 3. Max is traveling abroad and he's purchased a one-time use 30-day international cell phone plan. There is a one-time fee of $30 and includes 120 megabytes of data usage. Each extra megabyte after that is going to cost 25 cents. Express the charge for this plan as a piecewise function. Now, I know you guys don't like piecewise functions, but they're all over the place. So I'm going to make this as easy as possible for you. This is very common, right? So many cell phone providers offer international plans, and you definitely want to buy them if you plan on using your phone because Wi-Fi is so readily available in the United States, and they actually have it quite a bit abroad, but it's not always the case that you're going to find all of these Wi-Fi hotspots all over the place. And you'll inevitably end up using data. So you want to purchase one of these, and maybe it's $30, maybe it's more. It really just depends. Sometimes you can buy it just for the day. I know Verizon offers it for the day, and it's $5, which is a lot if the whole month is $30. But this one also has a data restriction, and it costs you 25 cents more if you go over it. So we've got to represent this as a piecewise condition, which is really just numbers that represent conditions, right? So let's go through these conditions. We always have to define our variable x. So x is going to be the number of megabytes used, because you get 120 megabytes and you're only charged if you go over it. And let's let C of x represent the cost. Since the first 120 megabytes are included, right, it's $30 for 120. If you use less than 120 megabytes, if the number of megabytes used is less than or equal to 120, then you're only going to be $30 as far as your cost. So this is the first case. The first case is if you stay within your 120 megabyte usage. Then we have another case that's, what about if we go over, right? We know if we go over 120 megabytes, it's going to cost us 25 cents each. And if you use a fraction of a megabit, you're going to have to pay for the whole one. You don't get to pay for 0.2 of a megabyte. So there's really two instances in which we go over 120. It's if we go over 120 and don't have any fraction of a megabyte, so we used exactly 121 megabytes, or exactly 125 megabytes, or exactly 153 megabytes. That's a whole number. But in the instance where it's not a whole number, where x is not an integer, say we use 132.5, we have to round up. So we're going to account for this by adding +1 when x is not an integer. When I go over my megabytes and there's not an integer. So the way I would represent this mathematically is if x is greater than 120, that's our condition, and it's an integer, then the cost is just 30 plus 25 cents times x minus 120. Remember, x is the number of megabytes used, but I don't want to overcharge it. I already have 120 that I paid for with this $30 here, so I just want to pay for the difference, right? That's if it's a whole integer. This is like in the example where I use 125 megabytes. I plug in 125, I do 25 times 5, right, and add that to 30. That's if it's a whole number. Now, the more likely case, because people aren't weird about tracking their data, is if x is greater than 120 and it's not an integer, then I keep exactly the same, but I add 1 because I have to round up. This is signifying the rounding up. This is still the $30 plan. This is 25%, 25 cents per extra data usage. And then this +1 represents me rounding up. So if I put this all together in a piecewise function, we get this. Remember, I've got my beautiful curly braces here. We've got the 3 different cost functions on the left and our conditions on the right. This is like your cost. I should have called this C of x. C of x is equal to $30 if the megabytes you use is less than or equal to 120. If the megabytes is greater than 120 and a whole number. If the megabytes are greater than 120 and it's not a whole number. Those are the conditions. Now I know those are kind of crazy, but like hopefully they make a little bit of sense. And as far as coming up with a piecewise function, I know you guys struggle with that a little bit, but being able to interpret it is very important. Because oftentimes they're not going to ask you to come up with one in real life, but rather you might come across an instance where you don't even realize it's a piecewise function, much like this real life example you might not even realize was piecewise. But you'll have to determine and figure out, like, okay, what part of that piecewise function am I going to use? What part am I going to evaluate? So The Telcel prepaid plan. This reminds me of like Cricket Wireless. Prepaid plan has a basic charge per month, which includes a certain number of free minutes. Oh, the joys of free minutes. There's a charge for each additional minute. The piecewise function below gives the price for an X minute phone call. Fractions of a minute are charged as if they are a full minute. So if you only talk on the phone for 30 seconds, you still get charged for the whole minute. Describe the cost of Telcel prepaid plan by interpreting the piecewise function. So this is, in fact, kind of the opposite. So in the last example, we were given a situation and broke it down a little bit and came up with a piecewise function. Here, I'm going to give you the piecewise function and we're going to analyze pieces of it and be like, oh, this is what this value represents. And oh, this is what this value represents. But this is very, very common, okay? Like when cell phones were first coming out, I'll tell you, I think I had Virgin Wireless for a very long time, and I went to the store and I bought a little card and I paid for my minutes because it was cheaper than having a cell phone plan, and I wasn't really using my phone enough. I was really just being a silly teenager and just texting and calling my friends or my boyfriend or whatever, whatever teenage kids do these days. So that was something that was really big, like in the late 2000s. Early and late 2000s, we would go and find prepaid plans all the time. There were so many different wireless carriers. Like you could go to Radio Shack, which isn't even a thing anymore. And there were all of these little like vendors that were set up where you could look at all of these different prepaid plans and find so many different like little cell phones and things that you could use. But this was a thing, like you bought minutes ahead of time. You didn't have a plan for them, you just bought them ahead of time, and if you went over those minutes that month, then you had to pay an extra cost. And also what I like about this example is like this is true. If you call your mom and you're on the phone for 2 minutes and 15 seconds, they're going to charge you for 3. I could show you my cell phone bill right now. They charge you a full minute, so you don't get to use part of a minute. But yeah, let's look at this piecewise function and let's see if we can break it down a little bit. So here's our piecewise function. We've got our costs on the left and our conditions on the right. It's always like, what is the amount that you cost? What's the value that you plug in based on what condition you match? We've got 40, x is less than or equal to 750. 40 plus 0.35 times x minus 750. X is greater than 750 and it's an integer. And then this complicated one that looks like the last example with a +1, x is greater than 750 and is not an integer. So let's start breaking this down, shall we? So looking at the costs on the left, looking just over here, there's something I noticed that every single equation, the first, second, and third all have in common. And that's the number 40, right? 40, 40, 40, boom. This is going to be the basic charge of $40 in each equation because notice they all have 40, and this one, the most basic one, says your cost is going to be 40 if you use less than 750, whatever that happens to be, right? So 40 is going to be the base charge. You're either charged $40 and you are in your plan, you're charged $40 plus more, so $40 is the basic charge for this cell phone plan. Now, something else that I want to look at as well is the conditions. They're all dealing with 750. This is something that I want to pay attention to, right? The x, which is the number of minutes, is always being compared to the number 750. It's either you're less than or equal to 750 or you're greater than 750. So if x is the number of minutes, then your number of minutes, you're going to get charged $40 if the number of minutes you use is less than 750, or you're going to get charged $40 plus a little something if you're using more than 750 minutes. So that's the number of free minutes that you buy with that cell phone plan. You're buying $750 up front, or $750, excuse me, 750 minutes up front and you're either going to stay under those $750 and just have your $40 plan, or get an extra charge. So let's look into those charges. I noticed that we have 35 and 35 in the two that have more than just 40, right? 0.35, 0.35. So 0.35 is next to X in each instance. And remember, X is the number of minutes. So this is the extra cost per minute. Every minute you go over your 750, they're going to charge you 35 cents. So all in all, if we were to describe this Telcel prepaid plan, you are signing up for $40 a month. You get 750 free minutes, and every minute you go over, you get charged 35 cents. That wasn't too bad, I hope. A couple more examples. Example 5, OptiZone. Let's go into cable. A cable, internet, and phone provider advertises a flat fee of $119 per month for all 3 services for new customers for the first year. Sound familiar? I'm sure if y'all have cable, you've heard these commercials of like, switch to blah, 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 switch to Spectrum, switch to Frontier, switch to Verizon. The company estimates that this will increase by 10% for the second year. And let's say Paulina, she usually pays $69 for a home phone, $45 for the internet, and $60 for cable. If she continues to use the same amount, her usage remains the same, so she's not going to go over on any of those things. How much would she save in the second year if she goes with OptiZone? Okay, so this is a weird thing. A few years, not a few years ago, like maybe 10 years ago, this was a very popular plan. They bundled together cable, Wi-Fi, and being a phone provider, because almost every single person had a home phone. Okay, that was very normal. When I grew up, I gave out people my home phone number. I didn't have a cell phone. Now it's usually just cable and internet that is bundled together, because the use of a home phone is kind of obsolete in today's age. But some people still have that, and some companies still provide that. And having a home phone is kind of nice if you don't want to give out your personal mobile number. I know, like my grandma, she still has a home phone, and she still has an answering machine and all of that stuff. And sometimes the cost is worthwhile. So you just kind of get the perks of having a home phone number too. And then you like jump a little bit when it rings because you forget that you have a phone, a home phone. But oftentimes, a lot of places will get you to switch by bundling this stuff. They'll advertise a low monthly cost, and then there will be this little guy that comes in at the end. He's like, "This offer applies to new customers only for the first year. Every month thereafter could potentially go through an increase of 10%." Blah blah. The fine print. But this is something that happens all the time. And upon first look, if it's $119 for cable, internet, and phone, Paulina's paying 69, 45, and 60 for all of those same things, yeah, it would make the most sense that she would switch to save money, in the effort of saving money, which is something you guys will probably face at some point in your life. Do we switch or do we not? How much money do we save? What about when it increases? So this is a very applicable example. So the question here is, how much is she going to save specifically in the second year once it starts to go up? We know that she's going to save money the first year. $119 per month. We know all of this stuff added up is more than $119. But what about when it increases by 10%? So let's figure out the monthly sum for all of the services that she uses in order to be able to compare apples to apples. And this isn't too crazy. We're just going to add them all up. $69 for her phone, $45 for internet, and $60 for cable. So she pays $174. Obviously, this is much higher than $119 per month. So that's how much she pays for them separately. She's spending more money. Anyone could see that, right? So now, if she goes with OptiZone, how much would it be after the first year with that 10% increase. So let's take $119 and multiply it by 10%, to figure out how much more it's going to increase. And then that's being added to the $119. So 119 times 0.10 times 10% is 1190. So I know that 1190 plus the baseline of 119, her bill is going to be $130 year 2, year 3, year 4, continuing on, whatever it is. After the first year, her bill can go up from 119 to 130. After that first year, that's how much she's going to pay for all 3 services, which is still significantly less than what she's paying right now. So it's still worthwhile, even though it will increase at some point in time in comparison to how she's purchasing them separately right now from potentially different providers. So we need to figure out how much she's going to save. How much is she going to save? If right now she's paying 174 and in the future the max she might pay is 130, how much money is she saving? It's a simple subtraction problem. So Paulina saves $43.10 per month by switching to OptiZone, and bundling. So that sounds like a pretty good amount, but actually it's even more. If you take that $43 a month and you multiply it by $12, that's over $500 in savings per year. Imagine what you could do with an extra $500 in your pocket that you are paying for anyway, right? Like that would go towards my next flight of wherever I choose to go once this quarantine is lifted. That $500 is going towards a really fun weekend somewhere. A little getaway, maybe, the hotel or resort or wherever, plan on going, or an exciting activity like skydiving or something crazy. I don't know. Can you tell him I want to get out of the house? But she saved a ton of money. It makes the most sense. Even if she didn't use the home phone, this probably would still be worth it. And the last example. Okay, this one's a little long, but it's not that bad, and I feel like this is the most applicable. So Dave is considering 2 different ways to buy a new cell phone. He dropped his phone, cracked it, it's ruined. He needs a new phone. Okay. So he's figuring out there's 2 different ways that he can think of to buy a cell phone, and he has to have a new service plan that goes with it. So you can either buy a phone through a carrier like Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, whatever it is, and they'll give it to you at a discounted price, and then you have to pay for a service plan. Or you can buy the phone on your own off the internet or from Apple or, whatever the other Android is. And then you can go and find a provider and say, hey, I have my phone already and this is a plan that I'd like to purchase or whatever. So those are your 2 options. Dave found the information on both types of plans and we're going to compare them, right? So who has the best deal, right? You can either go through your provider and purchase a plan that they give you a setup of, or you can buy the phone separately and then go back and retroactively find a plan that works for you. So here is the things he found. He found that if he purchases a phone subsidized by the service provider, he could pay $199 for the phone and $90 a month for unlimited talk, text, and 2 gigabytes of data. Or he could pay $650 for the phone separately, find a $50 a month cell phone plan for unlimited talk, text, and 2 gigabytes of data. So he could find one subsidized by his service provider. Perhaps he has Verizon or Sprint or T-Mobile or something like that, right? Or if he goes and buys it separately from a website or something like that, or off eBay, or I don't even know, pay $650 for it. Now, notice that the prices are different depending on which way he goes. Do you want to pay less for the phone initially or more upfront? And think about your budget, what you can afford. And do you want to pay more per month or less per month? This is the same exact plan. It's unlimited talk, text, and 2 gigabytes of data. So the first one is like if you purchase your phone from Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile. The second is like if you went to Apple and find a different plan. So we really want to know, how can he compare the 2 methods to figure out which is a better deal over the life of the phone? Like, there are some serious financial decisions that have to be made here. Dave has to realize, can I afford $199 right now, but $90 a month? Or can I pay more upfront for my phone? Can I pay perhaps the full retail value of the phone and have a lower monthly payment? Which one is more worthwhile for me in the long run? These are something he has to think about. And then we're going to specifically talk about the life of the phone. How long do you plan on having this? That seems to be the best way to compare it. So here's the same situation. So one way would be to compare the average cost rational functions. We talked about that in the last one. It's just the cost over the number that you're dealing with. So A of x over C of x over x. So if A is going to represent subsidized, the 199 plus 90 over x, this would be my average cost function. And if unsubsidized was 650 plus 50x over x, that would be my average cost for that one. So I'm talking about the same two plans, but I'm talking about their average cost, and I give you that function right here. Oops. Here's the graphs of these two, because these are a little crazy and you have access to like Desmos and stuff like that, right? So if I were to graph the two functions right here, I notice that they intersect at this point right here. The intersection point is 11.275 comma 107.65. So the x-axis is in terms of length of time. X-axis is almost always in terms of time, and the y-axis is therefore going to be the cost. So at this point, both of the functions are equal. That's a characteristic of an intersection point. They are equivalent at this time. So at this point in time, the cost is the same, and that cost is $107.65. So both of the plans have the same cost at this point right here. However, as time goes on, you can see that the blue graph starts to swoop lower, right? So initially, they both start off a little bit higher, and then they meet at this particular point where they're the same. Really comparing apples to apples here. And then you see the red graph is above and the blue drops below. Remember, the height on the y-axis is the cost. You want that to be lower. So you would want to go with the blue graph. And the blue graph is B of x, which represents the unsubsidized plan. So if this intersection point is 11.275, that's the length of time. So they're going to be the same cost after 11 months, at 11 months. And if you're going to keep your phone longer than 11 months, which, like, who's not going to keep their phone longer than 11 months? We would hope that they would, but you never know. If you keep your phone longer than 11 months, then you're going to want to save money by going with the blue function, with going with B of x, which is unsubsidized. So if Dave, looking between these two, if he can afford the $650 up front, it is more worthwhile for him to choose the unsubsidized plan. So to buy the phone up front from somewhere else and then go in and find that $50 a month plan from a different provider versus purchasing straight from Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint, whatever other plans are out there. So this is something that you might want to do, right? You might want to figure out the average cost, which is just going to be your cost function divided by x. Plot them really quick and see how long it takes and see, am I going to take that long or not, to determine. So that is our discussion on electronic utilities. See the hyperdoc for more information, and I will catch you guys next time. And I promise we will eventually start building a budget. Peace.